Now, one thing, Dennis, is I'm curious. Obviously, you guys have been doing this for a while. And I'm sure some of it has been some of your impact, but I think there's also a bigger impact just happening in the mainstream. And I'm curious if you've seen maybe a little bit of a shift in the rhetoric around Bitcoin specifically, and maybe Bitcoin mining a little bit even more specifically around some of the rhetoric. And so, obviously we know some of the hit pieces that have been done. Bitcoin is going to consume more energy than the entire Earth, and things like that. We've seen stuff like that. We saw the hit piece I referenced earlier, like New York Times did in the Riot Bitcoin space, mining space. But then, I'm curious, now that we're starting to see, BlackRock coming in and like, hey, we're going to launch a fund, ETF, right, and Fidelity, and so, even Fidelity, doing some mining and things like that. Do you think that will start to shift the mainstream media's portrayal of what it is? I mean, BlackRock potentially is going to have a lot of money to spend towards getting people into their ETF. BlackRock is probably a big sponsor of some of this mainstream media. Are you starting to see it shift, or do you think that will start to shift it?
Yeah, absolutely it will. I've said for a long time that, as Bitcoin advances in the United States and as the organizations with all the money, organizations like, BlackRock, start to come on board and start to see the value of this technology, that once they start to see that it's something that they want to push to the folks within their fund, that they will actually turn around and use their political power to protect Bitcoin. So I think there's something to be said about the fact that Bitcoin is very permissionless and it has a very strong incentive structure. And so anybody can gain access to it, and it is going to use its strong incentive structure to encourage everyone to be a part of it. And once you're a part of it, Mark, like just like myself, all of a sudden I'm into Bitcoin, and 5 years later I'm fighting at the front lines, trying to make sure that folks are educated on this issue. I could probably get paid way better to go do something else, but I'm out here trying to make sure that this technology is advocated for and that Americans have access to it. So yeah, I do agree that BlackRock coming in will be good in the sense that it will provide additional resources and another voice, kind of in the void, so to speak, a very large voice, one of the largest, or if not the largest, fund in the entire world coming in and supporting the industry. But also, I do see there is a churn or a shift in the narrative taking place. We do see a lot of bad articles coming out about Bitcoin mining, but in the last 6 months, there has been a rapid uptick in positive coverage. In fact, in the last month or two, we have seen Forbes just come out with positive article after positive article around Bitcoin mining. That means that the folks at the top at Forbes are starting to think that maybe that this is something that they had gotten wrong in the past, and that now they are starting to see the value of it. I think that Forbes is just the beginning, and that you'll see more of this take place. We should be giving a very large shout out to people like Pierre Richard, Daniel Batten, and others who have done a lot of work to try to convince folks that we need to be getting behind Bitcoin and that America needs to be leading on this technology.
In regards to that, with America leading this technology, I mean, it is American technology. It was developed in America. It has the American ethos built in, right? Strong private property rights, rule of law, et cetera, et cetera. And we saw, China had over 60% of the network capacity, of the mining network capacity in China. And then China took a very aggressive stance and kicked it all out of its country. And the United States became a big beneficiary of that. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if the United States is about 30% of that now. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But, we saw that the United States was sort of given that role, handed that role almost by default. I'm curious what you think the future is. I mean, if the United States continues on the restrictive war path, so to speak, does America lose its place with this technology? And do you see other countries potentially stepping up to challenge that role? Like, for example, Georgia, we saw, which is obviously a very small country, but stepping in to start mining it directly. Of course, El Salvador has been talking about mining it directly. So do you think, is it ours to lose? Do you think if they don't quickly change, another country could take the lead on this? What's your viewpoint on that?
There's always opportunities for other countries to attract the Bitcoin digital asset space, Bitcoin mining to their shores. And that's the great thing about this technology, is that it can really be anywhere that there's energy. However, that being said, I will say that the United States is in an incredible position to keep a vast majority of the hash rate inside of its borders, simply for the fact that we have a lot of inefficiencies where Bitcoin miners can take place over a vast area where they can start to benefit from the lack of inefficiencies that are created by wind and solar on the grid. But also, we have one of the most stable political systems in the entire world. Now, you go and you set up in somewhere in Africa, somewhere in China, you name it, you might go there, they might have cheaper power, but a couple things could take place. One is you might end up having to pay corruption charges. Like there are people that will just charge you money just saying, hey, you got to pay me money or we're gonna mess up your business. Or you have to worry about, for instance, in Kazakhstan, the internet going down completely, or China deciding to ban Bitcoin mining. So those things are not taking place in the United States. So far, we have not seen any sort of really aggressive anti-Bitcoin mining policy take place, other than just solely in the state of New York, where that's kind of a one-off situation. A second attempt was.
Well, what about like the whole Biden 30% tax and all that?
Yeah, I mean, sure, the president can suggest whatever he wants, but it never really had a chance of passing through Congress, and in fact was completely shut down during the deal trading that happened for the budget limit trade. I wouldn't call it trade negotiations. I always call it bill negotiations.
But if something like that were to go through, then that would qualify as a very restrictive, sort of like what these other countries have done potentially, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a 30% tax would have virtually destroyed the industry overnight in the United States.
But you think there was really never a really strong chance of that ever happening? It was more just like some rhetoric?
Absolutely. Rhetoric, very, 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 very low chance of it happening. Like the thing is with bills, this is kind of the way that you need to think about them, is that you can introduce a bill for free, but it takes a lot of work to get it passed. And yes, if the Biden administration was wholly invested in a 30% tax on Bitcoin mining, they might have been able to squeak it out. But you have to remember, there are many other much more important topics and issues to the administration than screwing Bitcoin miners over with a 30% tax. I mean, you're talking about the war in Ukraine, you're talking about the border, you're talking about health, you're talking about homelessness. This is not an issue that is worth, even negotiating over. Fortunately, in a situation where we had the debt limit increase, where they were negotiating over that, Republicans had negotiated that they wanted no new additional taxes in that debt limit bill, which ultimately resulted in there not being any new taxes on Bitcoin mining. So kind of fortunately we were swept up in that, but that's kind of how DC operates. Like you don't ever go to DC and just say, I want this one bill to pass, and it passed because it was such a good idea. Generally it's like a movement or a wave of policy. Like you didn't, the healthcare bill was thousands of pages with hundreds of different types of policies in there. It's not just one little policy that passes. They oftentimes get grouped up into larger bills and passed or not passed. That's generally the way it works in DC. And again, we are fortunate that for some reason within the Republican Party, they were able to negotiate that they wanted no new additional taxes. I mean, they're generally anti-tax, so that's why, but for some reason that was a big part of their negotiation package.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I mean, a lot of times they pass these giant omnibus bills that have all types of things stuffed in there that most people have no chance to even read, right? And so, for example, one of the things they do, which unfortunately seems like they're going to continue to spend more money. We just saw how the debt ceiling debate went down. And when they want to pass these new spending bills, they have to figure out how to get the money from somewhere. And a lot of times those take into new taxes into account or something like that. They have to figure out how to pay for that. So, it's a matter of staying vigilant, right? It's my fear is that they do these things, and then they kind of throw it out against the wall. It's kind of outrageous. It's what you'd call like a drop cell technique, right? They throw something out outrageous that people object to. They take it away, and then they bring it back a little bit more tame, and then people kind of just like let it go through. So we definitely have to stay vigilant. So I love what you're doing with Satoshi Action Fund.